Welcome to the stage, Andrew Knoll. You can put your briefcase there. How's it going? Thank you for joining me. Okay, on stage we have Andy Knoll, Dr. Andy Knoll. He is a Fisher Research Professor at the Natural History and Earth and Planetary Sciences. I don't know if that's correct. You want to correct me if I'm wrong? Okay. But he's also a recipient of the Breakthrough Science Award for the AAAS Science. Let me look it up really quick, multicellularity came early for ancient eukaryotes. And so I know you mentioned to me in emails previously that you weren't like directly like a part of the study, but you were still, in the field of like discovering this ancient eukaryote, correct?
Yeah, I should say two things. One is that for the last 50 years or so, I've been interested in the history of life during the 85% of life's history that precedes the evolution of animals. Our planet has largely been a microbial planet for most of its existence. And I think in terms of biogeochemistry, you could make the hypothesis that it's still a microbial planet. This particular paper really comes out of the lab of my old friend and colleague, Maoyan Zhu in Nanjing, and his postdoc, Lanyan Miao, who's a wonderful, wonderful young paleontologist. And they discovered in some fairly old rocks evidence of eukaryotic organisms, that is, organisms like us with a membrane-bound nucleus, which were multicellular. And they asked if I would join them because I've been working in this area for a long time and know a little bit about biology as well. And I think in some ways, the real lesson of this is that simple multicellular organisms existed among eukaryotic clades 1 billion years before the complexity that we associate with plants, animals, and some fungi. So that raises the question of why might it have happened so early, and also why did it take so long till the beginnings of organisms like us to come along?
I don't know if this is a dumb question, but like, how do you even figure, like, how do you identify it from fossils?
Okay, the bad news about fossils is that all you have largely is morphology. You don't have preserved nuclei or things like this. The good news is that many eukaryotic organisms actually make structures that are not mimicked by bacteria or archaea. And so the population that we've been looking at, which is a little more than 1,600 million years old, is filamentous. It is of a size that, frankly, if these were found in much younger rocks, you just say they were fossil green algae and go home. There's evidence of cell differentiation, again, something unlikely in most bacteria. So it actually has characters that we can, I think, reliably say this was eukaryotic.
And how do you date something? Like, how do you date a fossil? Or like a date in a eukaryotic cell?
Okay, well, all dating of geologic time is done on the basis of radioactivity. And very famously, uranium has certain isotopes that decay at a known rate to forms of lead. Mm-hmm. And so if you find volcanic rocks, volcanic ash, they have a mineral in them called zircons. Zircons rather famously incorporate uranium into their crystal lattice, but they don't incorporate lead. So if you take some of these ash beds to your neighborhood geochronologist, that person can find zircons in it, measure the amount of uranium and lead in them, and that actually, with some error bars, but it actually gives you a date in years.
So we believe that, the first multicellular eukaryotic happened, you said like 1.8 billion years ago. I guess or if we thought the theory happened at this time point, what led to wanting to continue to kind of dig deeper to see that we, in fact, happened even more years prior than we initially thought?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that while we've learned a lot about early life on Earth over the last 40 or 50 years, there's still a fairly sparse record, both because Earth is this planet that writes its own history in sedimentary rocks, but it also erases it as it goes along, and the older you get, the fewer rocks you have. And so people have been slowly through time working their way backward. There's not necessarily a reason to think that no one will ever find older multicellular eukaryotes, but there's only a few rocks available to look at. So in some ways, everything we say about early evolution is sort of the state of play, what we know so far, knowing that we will learn more in the future.
Are there specific like hotspots around the world where you find more rich fossils, I guess, compared to like other areas? Or like, how do you pinpoint where exactly to start looking?
Well, it turns out that for the last 200 years, geologists have been mapping the surface of the Earth. So if I want to look at problems that take me to rocks of a certain age, I can figure out where to go. And increasingly, we have a sense of the best kinds of rocks to look in. This afternoon, I'll be sharing the platform with a very good young scientist named Ross Anderson, who has been really showing us what characteristics of rocks help to preserve these fossils. And so armed with that second insight, I think we'll, maybe learn a lot in the next few years.
What got you interested in even looking at rocks? Like, why is this your career?
Well, I don't know. Like many people, when I was 18, I went to college and hadn't the slightest idea what I wanted to do in life. And fortunately, I took an earth science course and a biology course my second year, and I loved them both. And in one of the few real insights I think I've ever had in my life, it dawned on me in my room one night that maybe these weren't the separate universes that the way that they were taught in those days, and maybe if I was interested in evolutionary history, it would help me to know something about Earth's environmental history and vice versa. And that to me was seductive, and it's just something that's sort of kept me happy and for the last 50 years. And I think there is something deeper, and it's not necessarily specifically associated with me, but the idea that pretty much everything you see around you, from the shapes of mountains to the atmosphere's composition to the diversity of life, really reflects the interaction through time of physical and biological processes. So that's fun.
With this new breakthrough in science, I guess, like, what does this open new doors, like new questions? I get what will be, I don't know if it's a so what, but I guess like what's next?
Yeah, I think the search for more continues, and I think we now have an interesting situation to try to explain, and I think we have some provisional explanations for why the evolution of complexity the way we have in animals and plants postdates the evolution of simple multicellularity by so long. I think you have to have simple multicellularity in order to evolve complexity, but clearly that's not enough. Something else must have changed, and I think it's the Earth that's changing.
Okay, and is that going to lead to like a new theory or just like a new proposition of like, I guess what you're saying, like how we understand what happens, what is the complexity before the complexity actually happened? That was a poor question. Never mind. Ignore it. I didn't even know what I said. But I guess I'm not quite understanding is, when we think about like like cells like living in like the hot springs in New Zealand versus like those that like eventually led to the evolution of Earth, I guess like where do these fit in with that?
Okay, well these come online after the Earth started to gain at least a modicum of oxygen gas in the atmosphere and surface ocean. You can't really have eukaryotes coming on the scene until halfway through Earth history, oxygen starts to accumulate in the atmosphere and oceans. And other than that, I think what we're finding was in a shallow, poorly oxygenated ocean environment. What does happen is when you start seeing larger, more complex organisms, is associated with a real transformation of the Earth in that the phosphorus cycle has changed completely. That leads to more food and more oxygen, all driven by Earth's tectonic engine. And that more food and more oxygen is arguably what made it possible to evolve larger three-dimensional functioning animals.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for clarifying that. We have some time for some questions. Anyone in the audience?
Anybody?
Oh, we got one in the corner over here. Working for it, Lisa.
Hi. I guess I'm wondering about those multicellular eukaryotes that were discovered. What leads you to believe that it's truly a multicellular organism and not simply like a biofilm of like an aggregate of single-celled organisms? Like, is there a specific distinct like morphology that the cluster of cells is forming that tells you that it's in fact a multicellular organism?
Yeah, no, that's a reasonable question. And I think multicellularity does include the proposition that cells are actually attached to each other, so you actually get structures. These are filaments that look very much like green algal filaments today. And we think, by the way, they almost had to have been photosynthetic because they have cell walls that completely encompass each of the cells, so there aren't too many more options. So it is morphology that gives you the answer.
Okay. We have one question in the front. We're going to give you a mic. One moment. Oh, it's for we're streaming this, so this is for our online viewers.
Have you encountered positions where the contingency, where there were two paths and one was taken, the other was not?
If I understand your question, I guess the answer is no. It's very difficult for anyone who's doing history, whether it's, the history of civilizations or the history of life, to talk about roads not taken, because we don't know whether the road was there or not. And this, people wondering about that sort of thing have a voice at the table in astrobiological discourse. That is, if we're looking for life on Mars or, on Enceladus or something like this, to what extent is the observed history and functional biology of organisms on Earth the only game in town? Might there have been very different things? And the answer, of course, is we don't know, and we won't have any clues to that until and unless we find a second version of life out there.
Well, thank you for your question. If you want to hear more about how they're characterizing their fossils with his colleague, he will be presenting later today at 4 o'clock in room 312 on multicellularity came early for ancient eukaryotes. But thank you all for joining me. I have one more Sci-Mic sesh happening at 3:30. We're going to talk about the ethics of space, STEM education, and social contract with science and society. So please come hang out with me, join me. Let's wrap this up. But thank you so much, Dr. Knoll, for joining me.